Thanks for joining me to talk about the Dean Talks. I came across your beautiful, beautiful rendition of Langston Hughes' Genius Child. And I wanted to ask you, what made you choose that song to do a cover of?
The way that Genius Child, the song came about, I wrote a show called An Evening in the Harlem Renaissance. And I chose a couple of Langston Hughes poems to have set for my voice. It was set by a New York composer by the name of Drew Heminger. An Evening in the Harlem Renaissance was commissioned by Indiana University, Pennsylvania. And it was all about folks like, Langston Hughes, Zora Neale Hurston, and all the wonderful, fabulous people who lived here in New York and around the world during the Harlem Renaissance. A couple of years ago, as we all know, we experienced a really horrific tragedy that unfolded right before our eyes, and that was the murder of George Floyd. And I had made a video of singing Genius Child just because I wanted to share a powerful poem that basically honors the child that is pressed down due to their genius. As an African American body of people, we have been told over and over and over again that we are not geniuses, that we are not gifted, that we do not have a place in the world. And when I sing Genius Child, I'm singing to the child who is there, who is struggling, who is, the outcast in the family because they love to read, or the outcast in the family because they love to sing. And so I feel like for Genius Child itself, it applies not just to the smarts you have here, it applies to your whole body. You don't have to, in my opinion, have an outward gift in order to be considered a genius. I guess that's a better way of what I was trying to say, because I had a gift from, people could hear me sing since I was 5. But my sister had one that had to be kind of pulled out. She was a great artist, and who knew that she had those capabilities until she was in an art class. And I feel blessed. So when I was 5 years old, I was singing, I grew up Catholic, and I was singing along to the Our Father. 5 years old, and this gentleman turns around. My cousin reminded me of this when I was just at home, turned around and gave me some Now and Later candies as a 5-year-old. And he said, "You have a really lovely voice." And when I was 8 years old, I made my debut with my father. My father is a blues legend in St. Louis. His name is Roland Johnson. And my daddy has always sing. He still does sing. He's 70 some odd years old. Sorry, daddy, I had to tell you age. My mother had been trying to get me to go, enroll me into the performing arts high school. The performing arts school, but I didn't make it there until 8th grade because they had a long waiting list. So it was a long time. But my mom had been, applying. And so I got accepted. And that's when I found classical music, and then classical music led to opera, and opera led to me singing with Cincinnati Opera. And I was commissioned for my very first show that I wrote. It was an autobiographical show that I wrote with a good friend of mine, Eric McKeever, called Find Your Voice. And we went around to schools, and it was basically me telling the story about how I found my voice as a singer. And so now you can add writer to the mix. Okay. And I have received 4 commissions since then to write shows. Recently, I have become a BMI composer. I compose music. And one of the songs that I composed with my good friend Drew Heminger, I wrote the melody and the text, and it's dedicated to George Floyd. All of this came out of me, and it's called Breathe, and it's on YouTube as well. In just a couple of weeks, I'm going to be going to Halifax, Nova Scotia. I was asked to do sound design for a new play. I've also written 2 libretti. A libretto is the story that's behind an opera. So I've written two libretti. that's plural in Italiano, okay? Two libretti for, and that's actually going to be on television here coming up sometime this fall on PBS. I just made my Lincoln Center theater debut earlier this year. We did a world premiere opera. It was the first time at Lincoln Center Theater that they had an opera written by Pulitzer Prize winner Lynn Nottage, and also Ricky Ian Gordon. And that is going to have its televised premiere on September 23rd, 2022 at 9 p.m. on PBS. Oh, and I created another show called Music as the Message, which is my musical initiative to bring people together to create community through music. And in that, Music as the Message, I have professionals sing, I have amateurs sing, I always have some kind of spoken word. I also commission composers to write music specifically for that episode. We call them episodes because it's a hybrid performance where we live stream. This is kind of wacky and awesome. We live stream on Zoom, so I could see the Zoom faces of the people, and I'm inside of a live space. So it's like we're on Zoom right now, and I'm in a live space at Broadway Presbyterian Church. And this way, you know how when things are streamed, normally you don't see the people who are attending. It's just they're silent watchers. Well, I want to see your face, honey. So we have a big old screen where we have all the Brady Bunch Zoom people up there, and that's my new music initiative. And then also the very last thing I will say, which is pertinent to Baltimore, I am a curator. And I was asked by the Opera Baltimore to curate an all-day festival on October 8th. And that festival is in honor of Anne Brown, who was the first Bess in the opera Porgy and Bess. And that will happen in conjunction, what I should say, in collaboration with the Art Social Club, which is, I believe, the oldest African-American gentlemen's club. Anne Brown, Todd Duncan, Ruby Elsie, these were some of the first people, Cab Calloway, also Baltimore, as you know. They fought all these fights that we're having to fight again as artists, as human beings, as Black people. And so on October 8th, we will celebrate. That is what October 8th is called, Opera on the Avenue. And it is presented by Opera Baltimore and also the Art Social Club. We have a couple of other partners. One is the No Boundaries Youth Organization, and they're just fantastic. And we have some supporters. The Black Arts District is also one of our supporters. And we have it was a big deal for me for this October 8th thing that I celebrate Baltimore. And I said, I need all Baltimore artists, honey. I'm not flying anybody in. I'm not training anybody in. Y'all already got the people. When I create, it's not just about, oh, come here, this really pretty stuff. You will hear some good stuff, but there's always a message.
You talk so much about community. It sounds like you grew up in a household where art was valued, like the genius in you was being cultivated. Can you talk about the impact of being in an environment where the genius was cultivated?
I did grow up in a household where the R&B, the soul, the blues, and the jazz artist in me was cultivated. However, the operatic classical girl was not as embraced. As a child, I literally thought that opera and classical music were only for white people. I did not even know that there were Black people who, when I found out there was like a whole list of folks, not one handful, but these many handfuls extra, and then more handfuls of Black folks who sang opera, it blew my mind. It literally blew my mind. So my mother was not having it, honey. She was just like, your practice room is in the basement. Now, when I say the basement, it's not it's not like all dark and dank, right? But I was not, that was like, oh my God, you're so loud, because opera, we don't sing with a microphone. We have to cultivate our voices where we can get over an 80-piece orchestra. I think that making room for individuality is something that we need to do within this country, and that starts in the household. The young boy who wants to dance and wants to do ballet, who's discouraged because he's tall, he's Black, and he could potentially be a football player or a basketball player. Make room for that. Someone else in the household who sang gospel music all the time, but now wants to get into opera, and there's a pushback. There's a pushback that says, you need to praise God. Well, God gave me this talent. I'm going to talk about neurodiversity in a little bit. I think I'm using this properly. There are people with different types of synapses that fire in their brain, and some of them are different than others. Speaking of, we were talking earlier in our private conversation about autism, for example. Not limiting genius because we have decided that that person is limited, that we have placed upon them a barrier that says, you have this label, which means that you can't possibly live on your own. You can't possibly have a job. You can't possibly get a driver's license. And I have a nephew who's improving all of that wrong. He went on a vacation all by himself, planned it. My sister nearly lost her mind. So I think just making room for individuality, making room for people who don't think like us. And that could be your son, that could be your husband, that could be your daughter, that could be your cousin, whoever it is in your life. Leave room for them to discover their genius. That's what I would say.
Some kids feel like because they don't see someone in the room that looks like them or advocating for them, that's like the first barrier to them building that confidence. So what would you say to someone who won't go into a room because they don't see anyone in there that looks like them? And maybe at home there isn't the full understanding of what that potential or genius is in them.
I can speak in terms of a story, if that's okay. When I was in high school, I received a scholarship to go to Tanglewood in Boston, Massachusetts. And I'm from a predominantly Black neighborhood. It was the worst culture shock and the best culture shock because my roommate didn't speak English. She was from Japan. I was one of maybe 3 Black people there, one of 3. And I hated it my first week. I called home and I said, I want to come home right now. And this is when I was like 16 years old. I was just like, because we live in this bubble of life where what I see in my little, neighborhood or whatever, and what I discovered after I talked to my godmom, what she encouraged me to do is be a sponge. Only be concerned about what I am learning and what I am getting, the information that I'm getting at this institution. The race of the person who is presenting the information is not as important as the information that because at first I just saw white people and it was like, or Japanese people, or Chinese people, oh, you're like, who are all these people? But once I started having conversations with them, once I started seeing them as human beings rather than as a race, that kind of changed my whole thinking, literally for the rest of my life. Because if I hadn't changed my thinking, I probably wouldn't be where I am today, Ebony, because I was usually the only one, or one of 2, or one of 3 Black people in the room. And the way that I didn't get intimidated is I stood in my own knowledge, right? And my own power, which I had to find. The person you're talking to right now, she wasn't here 20 years ago. Something I want to tell my African, especially my African American brothers and sisters, you are an individual. So when you walk into a space, you are you. Represent yourself. Represent the things that you believe in. One of my superpowers is I will tell you my fault before you tell me my fault. But that's the thing. We cannot work inside of a bubble. So when I say go in and knowing that you're the best, if you're not quite up to snuff, get yourself up to snuff. So don't be concerned about what they're doing. I wouldn't even be concerned about the fact that they all white people. Or all Asian people. I don't care. I don't care because I'm here trying, and especially like for instance, let's talk about college. When you're in college in a certain degrees, you're going to be the only. A lot of my friends who are doctors were the only Black resident in the hospital. So
if there were any closing thoughts that you wanted to offer or any home routines you do to make sure you always leave room for that self-love and reaffirming space, you can feel free to.
those deep breaths in the morning that I take, I do it while I do a stretch before I even get out of bed. After I do that, I make my bed every single day, and I do not pick up my phone until I leave my bedroom. And in the evening, I have quiet time with my husband. And then at the end of the night, I shoot pool on my iPad. So those are my routines in order to stay present and then also in order to just release. This is a song for the genius child. Sing it softly, for the song is wild. Sing it softly as ever you can, lest the song get out of hand. Nobody loves a genius child. Can you love an eagle, tame or wild? Can you love an eagle, wild or tame? Can you love a monster of frightening name? Nobody loves a genius child. Nobody loves a genius child. Kill him and let his soul run wild.